All right. Well, I couldn't hear everything that Daniel said at first because of a little technical glitch, but I'm going to assume we're proceeding in, and he said a bunch of wonderful things about both Ben and I. So if Daniel introduced Ascend and myself already, I'll skip that part. But our company, we really value what the MBDC provides for the greater Nebraska business community. And we know how important these government contracts are to the local economies. And understanding the complexity of these new security requirements that are coming out for anybody that wants to do government and DoD contracts, we were trying to think of a creative way to help people understand the importance of taking CMMC Level 3 seriously, and also to illustrate what the journey looks like, just to really give a very practical overview of the process to achieve compliance in your organization. And so as Daniel asked us to present a webinar on this, I thought of one of the most impressive success stories that I know of, and it's from a locally owned business who has taken this journey very seriously, the new requirements very seriously. They've done the work and made the investment to make sure they're going to be able to continue on long into the future as a government contractor. And so today I'm going to just have a conversation with Ben Kurtz. He is one of the partners with Kelly Closure, and have him kind of lead us through what this journey has looked like for them. So Ben, thanks for being here. Thanks for taking time out of your day to do this. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. Thanks, Russell. As Russell said, I'm with Kelly Closure out of Fremont, Nebraska. We're a small manufacturing firm. We've been in business since 1968. We build a panelized metal building system that's suited for heavy industrial use. We do most of our work for the power industry, power plants, nuclear plants, fossil power, and also with the Department of Defense. The work that we do for them consists primarily of troop construction projects that get done by the Army, and naval shipyard work that we do for protecting systems for ships when they're in for repairs and things like that. The government work that we do comprises of, at any given time, anywhere from about 40 to 50% of our overall business. We do have a GSA scheduled contract with the government that we supply our goods and services through. And then we also do a lot of standalone contract bids and things like that as they arise. That seems to change on a client-by-client basis these days. To kind of give you an idea of where we're at as far as our IT is concerned, we have about 20 users on our network. We have a file server here at the office. We run all of our email and those things through Microsoft 365. But we do host things like QuickBooks, SolidWorks for our design and things like that. And then also to kind of give you more of a lay of the land, our IT department consisted of myself and one of my partners up until about the middle of last year when we decided it was time to shift to managed services and get some more help on compliance requirements with regards to the CMMC.
Now, Ben, so I'm going to back up just a hair, and I want to talk a little bit about that the CUI, the controlled information that you guys deal with. Because, as you describe some of the contracts you do, it sounds like some pretty high-level classified stuff, but would you say that the nature of what you're dealing with, or the CUI, is pretty average compared to what most who would do any kind of government contract would encounter?
Yes. The information that we handle for the most part is technical in nature, like drawings, could be photographs of something that they want to cover up, site plans for where the buildings are going to go, things like that. It's stuff that falls under that CUI category. I think you can go on. I think the National Archives, of all places, is where they keep a list of all the stuff that falls under controlled, unclassified information. None of this stuff is quote unquote classified. It's not secret, top secret, anything like that. It's just documents that they don't want having float around in a general availability. Because if you get the I guess the idea is if they can get multiple sources of this stuff, they can put together a bigger picture and maybe find out some things that should be secret and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. And so even if somebody isn't working on something that sounds super exciting or super classified, even if you're dealing with a contract, right? If somebody has a government contract awarded, they're considering that CUI
Right.
that would
Right.
then in
That's
turn
the
make you
that's one of the
subject.
shifts. One of the shifts that happened when they went to the CMMC requirement over and above what they already had in place from a few years ago is that they changed the items that fall under that. I hate to call it classification because they don't call it a classification, but fall under that CUI. The contract information that you get is also something that you're supposed to be protecting because those have the bid dates or the project completion dates and things like that. So they fall into that too. And document-wise stuff that you used to get that was called for official use only. So it's not stamped classified secret or anything like that, but it just says for official use only. That's controlled unclassified information now.
Gotcha. So this whole process has really been a big learning journey for you guys to understand, first what CMMC Level 3 is, how it impacts your business, and then what would maybe make you fall under its guidelines. How did you first learn about the new CMMC Level 3 requirements and start this process of understanding they're going to apply to you?
Well, in the beginning, about 4 years ago, we went to a seminar that the Nebraska Business Development Center put on about cybersecurity requirements that the Department of Defense was implementing. And this was a requirement that we had showing up in the contracts that we were getting, where, by reference, where it would say, okay, DFARS, blah, 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 no long number, and cybersecurity requirements for contractors. And that required contractors to comply with the NIST 800-171 standard that's out there for cybersecurity. Here, about a year and a half ago, they updated their requirements to add this cybersecurity maturity model certification. That's what the CMMC stands for, where that process became an auditable item. So the DoD wants to have third-party auditors come audit your company to make sure you're complying with this cybersecurity requirement. And that's when things really started to change for us. We found out about that through an organization called the Coalition for Government Procurement. They're a lobbying group out of D.C. that as a government contractor we belong to, and they help keep us up to date on all of the latest requirements and the changes in the federal acquisition regulation, items like that. And they focus on things like, okay, anything that happens that's going to put more requirements or more burden on businesses, especially small businesses. They're kind of our advocate for, what's coming down the line and letting the government know, hey, what you're trying to change here isn't always as simple as it sounds, or may put an undue burden on businesses and things like that.
But their advocacy didn't get you out of this one, huh?
No, not at all. And that's one of the things I've noticed through this process, having worked with the government for the better part of 20 years. They typically will crash towards something and they kind of back off a little bit, and then maybe in the end it ends up being a little more reasonable. With regard to the cybersecurity process, I can tell you they're very serious about it. They've moved this thing along. While there have been some delays and some adjustments to their rollout on this, it hasn't been what you would expect from the government. They haven't slowed up very much.
Gotcha. And I'm glad you mentioned the audit component to this because, as a managed IT partner to a lot of different companies, we deal with people in the financial sector who have their own compliance requirements and folks in the medical sector who have to worry about HIPAA and dealing with EPHI. And a thing we see in a lot of companies is sometimes the business leaders don't fully invest in achieving, the compliance standards because they hope they can fly under the radar. And as long as there's no security event, they're never going to be audited. But CMMC is much different in that they're going to be auditing and checking. And that process has already started. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where that's at now, Ben, with like the self-assessment?
Yeah, so one of the requirements that we have in this kind of pre-CMMC area is they added this past fall a requirement for DoD contractors that have the cybersecurity clauses in their contract to fill out a basic self-assessment in the this is going to get a little technical, but if you do government work, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's tied to the wide area workflow. The wide area workflow is the computer system that you log into to file your invoices and stuff if you're doing Department of Defense work. And inside that mechanism, they have the location for doing your self-assessment. So that ties back to your company. So they'll have basically at this point an automated way to pop in and check to see if you've been compliant or you're working towards compliance. The current requirement only requires that you fill it out. Doesn't have to be totally complete. You don't have to get a perfect score yet, but it does have to be filled out. And for each of the items that you haven't completed yet, they're asking what your plan is and when you are going to have those done. So when you have to have a plan, and that's part of NIST 800-171 is having a plan of action and milestones going forward through this process so that you know and you can kind of keep on your radar when this stuff's going to be finished. Currently, they don't have, with that requirement, a set date for when you have to do it. It kind of falls in with how your business is running and when you're going to be able to get to it. As long as you've got that filled out right now, you're good.
Okay. And so while the full measure of the requirements aren't going to be rolled out for a couple of years still or enforced, at this point, even to it's going to be in the very near future, though, right? Where just to get a contract, you've got to have that self-assessment and show that you are taking it seriously and starting the process.
Right. Currently, if you've got the cybersecurity requirements for the DFARS clauses that have to deal with that, you have to have a self-assessment done, or they won't be able to award you the contract.
Yeah, gotcha.
And as far as the CMMC is going to add the audit component. They're training auditors now, from what I understand. So.
Well, earlier, Ben, you're so much further down the road with this than many people I know. Especially subcontractors and smaller locally owned businesses. So you had mentioned earlier that up till just 18 months ago or so, you had taken care of your own IT. You and another partner in the business were just self-managing it, and that was even to the extent where you were trying to figure out what the NIST standards looked like for you. But how did your journey with CMMC evolve as you learned about it? And the MBDC, I understand, had a learning event that you attended, and you met somebody there that kind of helped propel you guys to the next level. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, when we first started working on the NIST requirement, Ron Warner, who's an instructor at Bellevue University in their cybersecurity area, was at that event as well. And I knew Ron before personally through some stuff with Boy Scouts and some of his work that he does with the Air Force Junior ROTC program in Bellevue, where he's a Cyber Patriot instructor. And my son had been in that program, so I'd known Ron from other things. And when we saw him there, I talked to him a little bit about maybe being able to bounce some things off of him and maybe retaining him as a consultant for us early on. And that really helped us to get the ball rolling as a resource because, we're only as tech-minded as we can be reading things on the internet and pulling stuff up in Google, whereas Ron's a cybersecurity professional and knows the ins and outs of what you have to do either through your computer setups or through written policies and things like that. And he was really a good resource for us as we step through the requirement, because I don't remember how many action items there are on there, but there's several, and we just kind of go down the list to see where we're at, and keep pouring back through that. So when we'd have questions, we'd talk to Ron, and then he would come back and say, well, you don't really need to go this far with it, but what about doing something like this? And so we could take what we thought may be a big sticker, a big complicated requirement, and he could help boil it down to, here's what you need to do to be compliant. And then if you want to take that farther because it's a good idea or it's good for your business or things like that, then we could expound on that as we go. And that's kind of how we launched our whole process. Our whole thought process with this was to kind of pick these things off as we can, one at a time, and kind of make multiple runs through the list, each time chipping off a little more and getting a little farther towards being compliant.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that got you ways as you worked through it with Ron, and you were able to chip off quite a few on your own. Tell our audience, I guess, a little bit about when and why you get engaged with us at Ascend Technology Group.
Once the up to the point where we got notified about the cybersecurity maturity model and the auditable certification that we had to have, it's a pretty big step. Our company has an ISO certification. We're also a Canadian Well Bureau certified shop. So we've gone through, both of those are auditable processes where we have to have somebody come in and, they're checking your records. They're looking at your processes downstairs. They're checking calibration records. They're going through all of these things. Having gone through that, I think helped prep us for what we were going to need to do here, and to recognize when we were passing a point that we couldn't maintain everything anymore. I think the biggest thing for us was knowing that we didn't have the software solutions that a managed service provider has for maintaining your network and monitoring your network 24/7. We didn't have the software to run all of these reports. At this point, when we need to run off the report to put in the file, so we have the like your network map, or you need to know what all of the hardware configurations are for every computer that you have in your company. A managed service provider has that software available, and it can run those things out whenever you want. So it's constantly being kept track of. And that, when we realized we were going to have all of those records ready for an auditor to look at, that's when we realized we were probably going to be in over our heads, or it was going to take too much of our time if we did it ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important, you mentioned there's certain inherent tool sets that a managed service provider is going to have that can provide more in-depth, logging and reporting and monitoring. But ultimately, you guys also looked at the landscape with a few managed service providers and realized too that it's not in everybody's wheelhouse for handling, understanding, and implementing the CMMC requirements. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's definitely true. The first company, we had a company back when we were taking care of this stuff ourselves that we dealt with to provide, work with our backup for our server, kind of provide our maintenance updates and upgrades for the server, and they were on call if we ran into something we couldn't take care of. They helped us out with that. We actually went to them initially on this thing to talk to them about, hey, can you guys take this over for us and help us get to this cybersecurity compliance? And we gave them a pretty long rope to work with, a lot of time to work on it, and that kind of thing. And they just weren't prepared. In our subsequent conversations we've had with them, they just weren't ready for this requirement to be out there, or for their clients to have this kind of a requirement for them. So we did talk to a couple other companies about it. Ascend was one of those. And in the end, after a pretty thorough, about a month-long process of back and forth, asking for asking questions, asking for revisions to the proposal, sitting down and reviewing everything to make sure that we were going to be in a pretty good spot as far as the standard goes, with what the services that were proposed. It took a little while to kind of comb through it all and make a good decision because, in the end, it's not free. There is an expense that comes with doing it, but there was an expense before, through the time that we were giving up on our side, trying to take care of this stuff all the time. So there's a little bit of trade there. Now we don't have to do that. If somebody has a problem, they pick up the phone and call tech support, which that's a benefit outside of just the cybersecurity part of things.
And I don't want to pick on anybody's managed service provider, but by any means. But I think what you say there is important for people to understand because, as you highlight what maybe a managed service provider can bring to the table to help with the requirements, the reality is many are not going to be prepared or understand the complexity of what's involved. And so I don't want any businesses out there in the audience to think just because they have maybe a managed service provider, whether that's a fully managed or just a break fix kind of on-call situation. I don't want them to think that means that they're probably most likely good to go. We've had to do a ton of homework ourselves to understand what goes into this, and then work hand in hand with Ron Werner, the security consultant, to make sure we're implementing everything in accordance with compliance, because it's a big deal. We take it incredibly seriously because we realize that if your DoD work makes up 40 to 50% of your business, there's no getting it wrong on this. If you guys have compliance violations, that's something that the managed service provider has to take incredibly seriously. The business truly actually depends on it. So if you have a managed service provider maybe, or an internal IT person, and you're not sure if they fully understand this, a step you could take could be to engage with Ron. And at the end of this, we're going to put our contact information out there, and I'd be happy to visit with you, and we can connect you with Ron and begin the conversation to see, for you to evaluate your current solution and see if it's really going to be able to help launch you into the next season of your own compliance journey. Now, Ben, I'm sure, I know I've talked firsthand to a few businesses out there that are DoD contracts or government contracts are a part of their business, and they haven't really started anything yet with CMMC compliance efforts. What would you say, based on your understanding of this and your journey, what would you say to somebody out there who owns or is an operations person in the business and they haven't started this yet?
I would recommend that you start looking at it now. Even if it's from a wrap your brain around it standpoint, pull the standard up. If you search CMMC, there's a website through the DLA that has the standard, and it's kind of a checklist, so to speak, that you can look down through it and see all of the requirements that you're going to have to deal with, because we talk about the level 3 compliance, which is what our company is going to end up needing to have, because we do handle controlled unclassed information, occasionally. But they have a level 1 requirement, which is going to be a blanket requirement for everyone that does DoD work, period. So even if you don't handle currently controlled unclassed information, the CMMC requirement is out there, and the certification requirement is going to be there for you too. So the earlier you start that process, and one of the reasons that we started it as early as we did is because that gives you flexibility to research and find maybe a better answer than you first thought you were going to have. It gives you time to get your brain wrapped around your budget for IT and maybe security appliances, or maybe more work from your managed service provider, or fees for a consultant and things like that. And if you wait until the last minute, you're not only going to lose out on government contracts that come up because they're going to disallow you from competing because you're not certified. But it also could be a major, cost issue for you as well to try to gain compliance faster. With a little more time, you get a little more flexibility. You can do things a little more economically.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ben, that you bring up, because there's been a legit investment that you've had to make to get as far as you have, both in your own internal infrastructure and in hiring a security consultant and bringing on a managed service provider that understands what's involved, and so to be able to spread the expenses out over multiple budget years leading up to when it's fully enforced is definitely going to reduce some of the pinch that a business might feel from having to make this jump. And I've got one more question for you. And before I ask that, though, I'm going to offer a little side note for our audience, that if you have any questions for myself or for Ben or even Daniel, you can go ahead and send those in through the GoToWebinar, and Daniel's going to start feeding those over to us to field any questions you might have. So send those over, and in the meantime, Ben, I'd like to ask you, based on what you've come to understand and learn through this and the progress you've made, but you haven't arrived yet, and there's still some ground to cover before it's fully enforced. How do you feel about where you're at right now in the process?
I think for us, and I've felt at different places at different times as we've gone through this. There's been a couple of times where I've sat and thought, man, we're not nearly as far as we need to be. But I think where we are right now with our company, we are self-certified to the NIST 800-171 standard. We have to implement the remaining level 3 standards, but I think we have a pretty good understanding of where we need to go from here. And we have a good team that we're working with to get there. And one of the byproducts that you get out of this journey that I think helps us feel a lot better is it's not just the CMMC certification that we're working towards. It's that we are really a lot more secure than we used to be. And so it's not just for the DoD stuff. It's for all the stuff you hear about, the phishing and the malware and the ransomware and those things. Those are not as big a concern. They're always a concern, but we're watching for that. We have processes in place to help take care of that. We've seen a real shift with our folks as far as 2 or 3 years ago, somebody come to you and say, "Oh, I clicked on this," and now it'll be, "Hey, I just got this in my email, and I deleted it," or, "Hey, can you look at this before I do click on it?" Or, "Hey, I'm calling a send about this because this looks like it might be a bid document, but I don't want to open it yet." And that shift in the last year or so has been a major change for us, and it's really lessened our risk out there. So it's not just the DoD part of it; it's the overall cybersecurity risk is less for us now. We're in a much better position than we were.
Yeah, that's another great observation about this process, and it's the government's not trying to pump out ridiculous standards. They're trying to help businesses enforce best practices. The State Department has told us that the majority of cyber crime is taking place from nation-state sponsored attempts to undermine our economy, steal money from our business. We've been told that North Korea is funneling money into their nuclear weapons program from money they're stealing from our businesses, and it's grown to be a $1.7 trillion global industry. And 1 in 5 businesses in the last 18 months has been hit with ransomware. And the average downtime and cost to the business is usually 10x whatever demand there might be, even if everything is restored, if the ransom's paid. And so it's causing serious interruptions to businesses, and for many, unfortunately, it's been business ending events. It hurts your credibility, your reputation when you have to reach out to your clients and let them know that their information's been exposed. And so enforcing all these standards just puts you in a better place as a business to where you can have more peace of mind and just know you're investing in best practices when it comes to protecting your business and your data and your customers. So that's a great side benefit to all this. It's certainly not just overkill to be able to keep getting those contracts. Now, you mentioned the employee training piece. I think that's valuable. You talked about like your folks have they've gone through some training that we've provided, and now they're starting to recognize those things and just look at everything that comes into their email inbox with different lens. Aside from some, participating in some of the security trainings that have been pushed out, what would you say is required from everyone in the company to contribute to the overall security posture? Think about the businesses that are listening out there that might think, okay, so from a leadership standpoint, we've got a budget plan and do these things, but what's it going to require from their whole team to move forward in their compliance journey?
Well, I think that you got to really work hard with your employees to try to get their buy-in on this. I think it's out there enough in the news. Cybersecurity these days, everybody knows about some company somewhere that had a ransomware attack or had something go on, and I think it's just what you have to have from all of your employees is a buy-in and a vigilance to take the time. If it's 5 minutes to read the security update that we get every week or two in the email that goes to everybody in the company, says, hey, you should be looking at these items, or hey, take this little short quiz, or watch this little video about how to help protect yourself from phishing and things like that. It's everybody needs to chip in a little bit in the awareness category. And something we've stressed here is hey, if you see something and it doesn't look right, it's probably not, and you need to point that out. And if you foster that in your company, then that's the shift that happens. Is all of a sudden that starts happening. Oh, hey, I saw this and it didn't look right. Is it okay or isn't it? And you can get more eyeballs on it, or somebody that's a little more trained in what they're looking at to help take care of it. If you don't have buy-in like that from all your folks, that's another area where you have a security problem. And that's one of the reasons that the standard part of that is training, annual or frequent training for your employees, so that they understand what's going on too.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and you guys took it more to heart than most. So whatever you did to get that buy-in from your team, you did a great job there. Hey, Ben, we did have a question come in. Somebody asked if you would repeat or clarify the name of that advocacy group that you're a part of, which you mentioned earlier.
Sure. Yeah, it's called the Coalition for Government Procurement.
Okay.
And if you just punch that into Google, it'll pop right up. They're a very, very active organization. We go, I think, twice a year. We send a couple of our corporate officers out they have meetings out in DC that have various topics that they cover, but they basically help you stay on top of all the latest procurement stuff that's going on, and that'll entail all of these regulations and things like that. It's been a very valuable organization for us. I've been with Kelly Closure for almost 20 years, and we've been a member since before I got here. So
wow.
It's been a very, very valuable resource for us.
Okay, great. And another question came in. Ben, do you use subcontractors at all in your work? If so, how do you have to address their CMMC compliance?
So as far as the CMMC is concerned, if you are going to be basically, if your subcontractor is gonna handle CUI, that requirement passes to them, and you have to contractually pass that along to them. For us as a manufacturer, a lot of the stuff that we get, our vendors don't even know what we're making with it. We buy things all the time that are being used in nuclear plants or, for Navy jobs and things like that. But the supplier that we're working with, they've never seen drawings of what we're building with it. And basically, what we did was said, okay, we've got a policy in place that we're not disseminating CUI to vendors because of that. But yeah, if they're interlinked with what you're doing, let's say construction wise, and you've got to share documents with them, then that requirement also applies to subcontractors. And we do work for large businesses out there, big government contractors that pass that requirement through their contracts to us as well. So it's not just coming at us from the Department of Defense directly. Other companies that we do work for have to pass that requirement to us as well in their contracts to us. So
Yeah, and in a very similar way for us as an IT partner to work with you, that requirement is passed back to us.
right.
So we internally have to also make sure that we are meeting all the standards of it, since with access to your network and your server, there could potentially be exposed to some of that CUI, and so that requirement kind of gets passed on a couple of directions. So also for those of you who might have a current managed partner outside your organization, a very important question to ask them if they're willing to achieve CMMC requirements themselves to continue to work with you. Well, if any more questions come in, they can still get sent over to us. But, it looks like I got one coming in here. No, okay. So I want to give just a couple takeaway points, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Daniel and let him wrap up. But there's really 3 steps that we, from the IT partner perspective, would encourage all of you who are knowing that this is in the pipeline for yourself to engage in. The first one is get a security consultant to perform an assessment with you. And as I mentioned before, I'd love to connect you with Ron. There's a couple other options if you're in the greater Omaha-Lincoln area or greater Nebraska as well. But get that security assessment performed, figure out where you stand and where you have to go. As Ben said, when he did that, then they were able to start working through a list of some items they could check off themselves. Some required investment, and a lot were just maybe changing some internal standards to meet those. And then once you get that plan, populating a security plan and coming up with milestones and a way to track what you've done. The third one would be engage with your IT partner to bring your environment into alignment. Once you have that roadmap from the security consultant, work with your IT partner. And if you don't have one, Ascend would love to visit with you and explore what that process could look like. Okay, so we got one more question here. And sorry, Daniel, I can't hear you, so I hope I'm not talking over you. But this question that came in is the documentation you're receiving from your customer being properly identified as CUI, or do you simply treat any documents received from government contractors as CUI? Ben, you want to field that one?
Yeah, because that's a great question, because and this sounds like it's coming from somebody that has the same kind of experience we do. It's not always marked. The stuff that we get sometimes is the government on their side of the fence doesn't always send it through the appropriate channels. I've received, and it's getting better, but we still get stuff sent to us that should be encrypted through the email, where it's just a straight up plain document. It's marked for official use only, came wide open in the email. Well, you're not supposed to do that. I do know that the government is also rolling out training for their folks for all of this is with regard to how to handle their documentation and how to deal with your contractors and get it out to them. But that's a good point. It's not always marked that way. The other thing that can happen is the work product that you produce for your government client can actually, after you're done with what you're doing and have come up with your, like for us, it's, drawings and documentation about the enclosure that we're doing for them. That can be CMMC, that or CUI. That can be controlled unclassified information once you've generated it. So not only could you not know that what you're working on at the time involved controlled unclassified information, but you could find out that what you are generating is turning into unclassified controlled information in that regard. So I know that's probably not the answer you were hoping to get, but yeah, it's not always marked. Our choice was to bring our network into alignment with the standard because it was a good decision for us as a company and making us more secure. And we've got salespeople that we're dealing with that are getting documents from the government all the time. And rather than have to worry about whether or not, I don't want those guys to have to try to discern whether or not that's controlled and classified information. If our sales guy gets a document and it's on his laptop, at this point it's encrypted, it's in a safe spot. We've regulated what he can attach to and not attach to, and we've kind of protected it that way. Because there are going to be times when you just don't know what you're handling, and until you do, and you got a problem.
Yeah, great question and great response. Appreciate your posture on that whole matter, Ben. We're bumping up against the threshold of where we were on time. So at this point, I'd probably say any further questions that come in, there's going to be a slide that pops up with our contact information. Please feel to reach out, engage with us, and happy to continue the conversation with anybody who's interested. So at that, I'll officially throw it back over to Daniel to wrap things.